Hello, 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 hello. This is the part. I am Julian Bimbo. This is the part where I reach out to a world of people I cannot see and hope that you were there. Welcome to another GlobeDocs discussion. We have Mary Maggio here to discuss a wonderful film that I thought was pretty sharp and pretty clever and pretty important for the time. Most beautiful thing. Welcome. Good to have you.
Julian, how are you?
Alive and kicking. Can't complain. How are you?
You know what? Living the dream, as you and I talked about just before we started. So, the film has been on a tear.
Right.
It could not have been timed, right? Just from a timing standpoint, it's playing
Right.
into so many national conversations, and the impact it's having has been really exciting. So excited to have this conversation with you today.
Well, so I want to get into the nuts and bolts, but I don't know if you can see my wall back there.
You know what? I was going to ask you about it. You've got quite a festive wall back there.
I enjoy it. It's my little. It makes me feel cozy. But at the top, there are 3 records by Little Brother, a rap group from North Carolina. In the middle is a guy named Ninth Wonder.
Wow! Yeah. Uh-huh. You know what? Ninth Wonder, his artistry, his genius that he brought to this project was off the
Right.
hook. And and I spent time with Ninth and all of the young people too that worked on the score.
Mhm.
And his sensibility. And he said to me, he's like, Mary, this is about rebirth. It's about everything that the water signifies, and we don't see enough of this in our communities. Like, whatever you need, I'm in. And so great that he's up on your wall. That is, I'm going to text him. He's going to get such a kick out of that.
That guy's amazing. And I mean, not to get starstruck, but I mean, I can imagine it can't be that hard to get a lot of the names that you had involved in this project behind it when you tell them what it's about.
Well, I'll tell you, Common was extraordinary. And when Arshe and I sat down with him, it was when he was recording his voiceover narration. And he said, he's like, this is a beautiful, beautiful story. I think the film had not been quite named, yet.
Mm-hmm.
And Grant Hill, right, NBA star, he was actually—
I've heard of him.
Yeah, right. He was in one of my early films, and we've always remained friends. And he was my first call. And his guidance, his leadership was extraordinary. And, I had a conversation with Arshe, I had a conversation with Grant, and I had a conversation with Marvin Owens from the NAACP. And I said, look, this is an extraordinary story. I've been involved in telling, sharing stories out of communities like this, but there's this renewed debate around cultural appropriation and who gets to tell stories. Yeah. And Grant said, Mary, Arshe asked, he called you and he called you for help. And I said, yes, he did. And Marvin Owens from the NAACP said, Mary, if somebody calls you, you are in service. And why would you ever think that you could decline such a request? And honestly, Julian, it gave me just the freedom to be able to honestly just amplify Arshe's story. And for me as a filmmaker, honestly, get out of the way. And there have been a number of people. It's funny you mentioned Ninth Wonder. He said, Mary, I was looking for your fingerprints all over this movie and I couldn't find them. And I was like, you know what? That is the highest form of praise that you could have ever bestowed, that there was a lens that's on this movie, and that lens is held by Arshe Cooper, and this is his story.
And actually, let's start there. Let's walk back a little bit, because I was reading a couple of things, and this just made me chuckle, right? So your first interaction with Arshe was on Twitter, because that's where everybody meets people, right? That's the best place to meet people apparently these days.
Well, it's actually even funnier, because Arshe told me he was tweeting Will Smith, he was tweeting Ava, he was tweeting Spielberg, and he's like, Mary, you tweet to me, I look you up, and then you tweet back. He's like, you're the only one that took my call. And, now here we are, sort of like this film is in full bloom, and a scripted series is now underway
Really?
with Amazon Studios, right? It's going to be an adaptation of A Most Beautiful Thing, and all
Okay.
of the impact that the film is having. And it really did start with a tweet. And how lucky am I? How lucky am I that somebody like Arshay would reach out to me and say, "Hey, would you ever?"
Now, how much of this was kind of like stars align a little bit? Because one, I think it's a mission of yours to tell stories that have like a social impact, right? And then also, this is a sport that you have like a deep connection to as a former Olympic rower or whatever. And I know, was it a friend that put a book in your hand and said, "Hey, check this one out"? And that's how it came together. But a little bit, it has to be like, it's a little bit too, too perfect for me.
You know what? Stars do align. And I'll tell you, when Arshay called me, I thought, this is the sport that I love. We can dig into systemic issues that citizens in places like the West Side, right, who don't have access and opportunity, have to deal with on a daily basis. Like, for me, this was exciting that our sport could be the backdrop of like a greater investigation into everything it is that, right, everybody has been talking about over the past year, except that we were talking about this, right? Like, this was Arshay's conversation 2 years, right? Like, in the making, way before, of course, the murder of George Floyd. But as Arshay tells me, right, this film is everything. Before George Floyd, there have been hundreds of thousands of George Floyds. And right. And so this film, I think, because of Arshay and his leadership, really speaks directly to that.
And I think one thing that stuck out to me, and I'll leave it to you as a filmmaker, but these stories are complicated. They are tricky. They are complex. These are people's lives, right? And I don't know if you remember this as a filmmaker. There was a run of movies in the 2000s, right? Like Coach Carter and Remember the Titans, and they made one about swimming with Terrence Howard. You know what I mean? It was a cottage industry for a while, and it became like a trope. And how did you kind of have to navigate one telling the story with nuance and detail that also like took care of their lives?
You know what? Thank you for that and for noticing that. I think many other filmmakers might have focused on the coaches, and the coaches were white. And I think it was really important when Arshay and I had a conversation. I said, look, there are so many white savior stories that inevitably happen. And you see the Academy Awards rife with those, right? Whether it's The Green Book, whether it was Best Documentary for the football team it's always the white coach that's like, sails in. And I thought, and I remember saying to Arshay, and I'm really interested, like, what you've done, and you as a person is really extraordinary, as is your team. But I'd love to like fully understand your mother's and your mother's journeys. And so that was really, for me, honestly, Julian, I was so educated during the making of this project in so many different ways. The first of which was when Arshay said to me, all right, we knew we were moving forward. We had raised the bulk of the money. And Arshay said, all right, you're coming to Chicago. I said, oh, hell to the yeah, I'm coming to Chicago. And this was before we had a film crew. And he's like, Mary, leave your ratty ass Red Sox hat at home. It is not welcome here in Chicago. And I said, okay, brother, I'm coming. And he said, we're going to do a ride around. They put me in the front seat. He picks me up with Alvin, and we head from O'Hare to the west side of Chicago, right? And you all of a sudden you see the topography. And we go to Arshay's house and we drive to school. And Alvin's like, okay, here are the new breeds. Here are the gangster disciples. Here are the vice lords. Here are the conservative vice lords. And I'm like, wait, there are conservative vice lords? Like, this is wild. And I turned to Arshay and I said, so how did you get to school safely? Like, I'm embarrassed that came out of my mouth. How did you get to school safely? Arshay looked at me and he was like, yeah, we didn't. And for me, as a person that lives in the world of privilege, and even though I've worked in communities, right, for the bulk of my career, to understand the topography, and that young people ages 8, 9, 10, and 11, they are making decisions and they're not active choices to survive. So for a young person a young man, a young woman, a child to get off their block, this idea of gang affiliation as an act of choice is a fallacy. And it's funny, I was called by somebody who had been incarcerated maybe like 6 months ago, and he said, Mary, it's not even a choice. Like, you are automatically branded when people say, where do you live? And you're like, oh, I'm on Pulaski and whatever, or I'm at the corner of 59th and Prairie, or whatever it is. You are automatically assumed to be affiliated with that gang. And I thought, for me, this was a revelation, the profound inequality of safety that our young people in places like Roxbury or Mattapan or the west side of Chicago have to navigate and endure on a daily basis. And I think the second, boy, you talk about nuance, the stories of these mothers speaking truth to power was mind blowing. And I say that because, as a person in privilege, and I think before this year, many people think, oh, slavery was 400 years ago. Like, that was a problem back then. And I think two things: slavery, what an antiseptic term, right? When you listen to Arche's mother, when you listen to Malcolm's mother, they are describing white domestic terrorism. And it is a generation away, right? Malcolm's mother was 4 years old, and she described men on horses with rifles chasing her in Mississippi on a plantation. That is one generation away. Arche's mother witnessed a lynching. Malcolm's mother witnessed a lynching, right? And so you understand that this trauma, this idea of trauma, it's intergenerational trauma, right? And as Arche has said to me very often, Mary, I pay for the trauma of my mother pays for the trauma of her mother. And so many, there was the Great Migration, of course, from Mississippi and other places to Chicago, people fleeing, right, for a better life, only to encounter, redlining and other systemic racist policies and impediments to success. And, we had a conversation with Congressman Danny Davis, and he said, who represents the West Side. And he said, Mary, the West Side was built on trauma. And so you start to understand as a person of privilege how deeply entrenched these obstacles to so many of our young people are across the nation, and how fundamentally undemocratic it is.
And then you talk about Arche. Obviously, he became like the I'm trying to make an analogy I don't want to make, but I'm going to call him the Quavo. He was the star. He separated himself from the bunch a little bit, but they have a bond, all of them, right? That I think is interesting, that spans over time, that you can still see, even if they're 40 plus, that you're. And how did I don't want to use the typical like sports brings everybody together cliche, because
it's kind of hilarious though, right? Because here's how I view it. Arche became the father that he never had. And what's beautiful about that is he has, he checks in with the guys, and he's been the glue to this team over the years. And I think he's now a new father, and to see all of these young men, articulate notions of fatherhood and assumptions around fatherhood in a way that is so beautiful and so hopeful. And they are trying to become the fathers that they never had, right? And so again, you see this sort of cyclical trauma play out. And yet you've got, Arche and these team members that are, funny and bright and hilarious and hardworking. And I think at the end of the day, Julian, our film really stands for the very simple proposition that access and opportunity, that talent is everywhere, right? Like, it's equally distributed. And you can find it in every corner, in every neighborhood. But what you can't find is access, and you can't find opportunity. And, I've thought about that a lot in the context of this project. I grew up in Needham, right. Safe neighborhood, like, I'm putting air quotes, good neighborhood. And yet I didn't come from money. And I was very, very lucky to see the inside of a college. And I remember my mother saying, Mary, you're always there when the bus comes. Like, you're I was lucky, and I was like, I'm pulling myself up by the bootstraps, and in the course of working with Arshay on this project, and Grant and Dwayne, there's no such thing, I don't think, as pulling yourself up by the bootstraps in this country. You know, I was handed lifelines. I was handed gifts, both large and small. And I know for a fact that if my skin color had been different, that bus that my mother used to say, you know, would stop for me, that bus would have kept right on going.
I think it's
And
interesting that you point out the lifelines, just because, like, of course, you could easily write this off as like, oh look, it's a like, and they didn't even want to do it themselves. Like, we weren't in the. They said they weren't in the paper because they were the first Black rowing team. They were in the paper because they were also taking an entrepreneur class and everything else. But it's interesting that you can point to access. It's like, it's not that they were just Black men rowing. It was that they had access to it. You know what I'm saying? They had like the ability and the opportunity to do it. Somebody created an opportunity and offered it to them. Of course, I mean, you put them out, you let them work. They'll figure out a way to be good. That's fine. But like, you don't know what somebody can do unless you can offer them an opportunity or some access to it.
100%. And you know what's special, and because I'm a rower, I have to say this, but what's special about the sport of rowing, you know, Arshay used to tell me that he would play football or basketball, but that his trauma was triggered, right? And because it's a contact sport,
Right.
there's trash talking, and he's like, on the water, there's an author, his name is Bruce Perry, and he's writing a book with Oprah, and he's a trauma specialist. He said, Mary, do you understand that this sport of rowing, it's repetitive, it's meditative, you're on the water, that for young people coming from traumatic backgrounds, it is the perfect sport as a place of healing. And other rhythmic sports, right? But and other rhythmic, you know, it might be swimming or running, but you're actually with a team. And as Arshay said to me, what was amazing about these young men coming together, right? Because they were in rival gangs from different neighborhoods, and they had to come together. They had to like move in the same direction. And the first time they went out, there was a whole lot of fear, right? Most of them did not know how to swim. And they quickly figured out that if they're like fighting each other, they're not going to get back, they're not going to get back to the dock, right? And then of course they go to these races, and you know, our sport has been stubbornly white, and they would be the only people of color at a regatta, and they were like, look, we got to come together because it's just us, right? And so you see that access and opportunity coupled with this idea that these young men who previously wouldn't have been vulnerable, or shared any kind of vulnerability, would actually come together to sort of trust. And at the end of the day, it's sort of a beautiful love story.
So I write about sports for a living. I did that Harvard Yale regatta maybe 5 years ago. It was fun. Like, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I was definitely a fish out of water in a million different ways. But just once you got around the teams and kind of started to figure out the sports and like took it seriously, right? Like, it wasn't just like I wasn't joking around. It was fun, and you see the work that goes into it, and you know, like, it's definitely a different environment. I'm not gonna lie, but the actual sport itself was pretty cool. All right, being on the water is awesome. And there's no better feeling. We'll get to some Q&A questions first, but before I let you go, life happens, right? Like, you just can't stop it from happening. Even when you film a movie, you know, you have a one person has a legal situation, right? And then also we have, like you said, a pandemic and social justice reckoning at the same time. How did you navigate all these different waters and still and how did it change what you were doing?
Honestly, you know, you just, around every corner, there is a surprise with Arshay Cooper, right? So the first thing was I get a call from Preston, right? And he's like, so Mary, I may have to go to prison and not finish filming. And I'm thinking, okay, what happens to our movie? Like, what? All right, like, we just have to react. And he said, and Arshay said, Mary, I'm sending the judge a copy of the book. Like, would you write a letter? So I wrote a letter to the judge talking about the project and how important, you know, the project could be. And the judge was so impressed with Preston that he said, all right, you're going to have an ankle monitor, but you are not going to have to serve. I want you to report back to me when filming ends, which was like 6 or 7 months later. And he's like, you're going to serve the remainder of your sentence. At that point, well, Preston walks in at the end of filming and explains what has been happening with the movie. And the judge, to his credit, said, time served. I am certain you're going to start making better decisions. You do not have to serve time. So the film in and of itself, right, to be a positive step for one person, like that's just a gorgeous thing, even though it's sort of like a tiny piece of it. But again, around every corner, you know, you mentioned the pandemic, you mentioned so much of this, the social reckoning. And what we're finding is that the film, because it is a sport of privilege, right? It is and with the leadership of Arshay, reaching across barriers to people with whom you may have a toxic relationship, right? Whether it's rival gang members, whether it's the Chicago PD. I mean, Arshay, and Arshay was very worried because he was like, hey, Mary, I've got this crazy idea, but I could be criticized. And so he went back to his community, everyone in his community, his parents, his grandparents, right? Like his friends were all in support of Arshay. And Arshay said, most of the criticism that I may have gotten have been from people who do not come from these communities and do not understand what's at stake with the relationship with law enforcement, right?
I think,
So,
yeah,
right?
no, that is, I thought about that. Like a lot of this film happens largely because of Arshay's ingenuity, which and his push, like, you know, he reaches out to her. And also like he's making some
Julian,
decisions.
let's call it what it is. Like he directed the movie. I'm kind of along for the ride.
Like, I've got a book. You want to make a movie? But he made some decisions that I think are that, like you said, could have been criticized pretty deeply. But and we can argue about it all day. But I mean, I think that it is a statement to what he is willing to, you know, make happen and able to make happen.
And here's the outflow of it. Arshay kept a text chain with Chicago PD after they raced together, right? Really extraordinary. And one of those cops posted publicly, Black Lives Matter. You don't see law enforcement. One cop said to him, Arshay, this experience has changed my life. People threw bricks at me in my uniform, right, during the protest, but I could go home and I could take my uniform off. You can't take your black skin off. And that never occurred to me until we had this experience with you. And for Arshay, and you know, he's changing minds, yeah, one cop at a time. But the fact is, you now have 4 or 6 or 8 or 12 cops that are going to be coming into these neighborhoods. And hopefully, as Arshay said, these guys need to know our names, period, full stop. And so I think his leadership is brave. I think it's like Planet Arshay. Stuff happens that shouldn't be happening. People come together that shouldn't be coming together whenever Arshay Cooper is around. And honestly, he makes us all better.
Let's have some fun with some Q&A questions. Was it difficult to get the family members to tell their stories?
Great question. And I would say no. However, I went and I do pre-interviews, right? So I went and I met Arshay's mother. He and I sat down with her at a Burger King, and you know, her life was really ravaged by trauma and consequently addiction, and terrible addiction that Arshay outlines in the book, which meant she was largely absent. And he was he wasn't homeless per se, but as close as you can get. And I said to Arshay, I said, you know, I think it's really important to understand like the addiction, like put it in context. And so he and I sat down, and his mother just zipped open her heart, right? And just spoke truth to power in a way that I think blew him away and frankly blew me away. And that courage to tell those stories that are so, you know, so raw and so honest, I think it was really brave of them. And for me, I think it was, boy, there is a lot of trust that has been placed in my hands. I better not F this up, right? Like that's honestly, when you have the trust of people who say, you know what, Mary is a person of good intent. This is not gotcha journalism. This is all about like, do I have integrity here? And as long as she's going to tell the story that I want her to tell, we're good. And I think, we went places in this movie I never expected to go, right? And at the end of the day, you have to follow the lead of the people that are like, my job is to build the risers, and amplify what's being said and not censor or filter what's being said.
Got one more.
I bet you feel the same way, Julian, as a journalist.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's, as a storyteller in general, it's like, one, trust is so important. And you're always fighting that battle of like just accuracy and authenticity, and just like it's a war, like, and you hope you're on the right side of it at all times. It's weird. Let me try to get a couple more in. At the end of the film, it says they qualified for the finals. Did they go? If so, how did they do?
Yes, and in fact, you have to actually watch the credits, but they won a silver medal. And we didn't we didn't cap that at the end of the movie, because that wasn't the point, right? It was that they got out there and they're on the water, and each one of them had such profound reasons, right, for getting back on the water, right? For Alvin, he was just off parole and he was celebrating the fact that he was still alive. For Arshay, this was a demonstration that young boys and girls of color should have access to the water and to the sport, and all of the things that the sport brings with it, right? And Pookie just didn't want to crash into the wall, right? So and Malcolm has a 15-year-old son that he is quite concerned will go down the path that Malcolm went, right? So it was really important to Malcolm that he demonstrate for his own children there is another path. And I want you to take that path and not do what I did, right? Not make the same mistakes I did. So witnessing these young men with their children was just a beautiful, beautiful experience.
How long did it take the film to create from initial conception to publish? Is the question.
I would say about, it took about like 3 or 4 months to raise the money. But I would say it took us about 15 months from start to finish. So we started filming in January-ish of 2019. And then of course we were releasing in March of 2020.
One is rowing. Sounds very therapeutic, as we talked about. Is there a continued effort to intro rowing into more kids experiencing trauma? And I was talking to somebody earlier. Is there a program in the area? You're a Boston person.
Yeah. So yeah,
something like that.
Yeah, there's CRI, community rowing. The philanthropy that we've seen in the wake of this movie, I mean, has been extraordinary. So there's a new fund, a Most Beautiful Thing Inclusion Fund, that is providing, supporting Arshay's work around access and opportunity to the water for young, on a global scale. Here in Boston, the head of the Charles, right, our friends right down the river, have partnered with the Gold Cup Foundation, and they are seeding $100,000 a year to underserved programs to help those programs grow. We're engaging with last weekend, the Obama Foundation co-hosted an event with Champs Mentoring and Pepsi in Chicago. Over 1,000 kids from the south and west side of Chicago logged in. They saw the movie. They all want to get to the water. So we're seeing the film be like this great shot over the bow for young people in underrepresented neighborhoods. And we're seeing the sport itself react. Both here, the British Olympic team took the film to launch a new philanthropy around creating access for underrepresented students. In New Zealand, there's a new effort with the Maori. Like, it is unbelievable, right? And part of it is timing, part of it is the sport, part of it is social reckoning. And then again, having this tool called The Most Beautiful Thing, right? Which is really firing people up.
I think I talked your head off, and we are already at 5:30.
What? How did that happen?
I don't know how that happened. Time keeps moving.
That went fast. So, to all of our Boston Globe viewers, thank you for tuning in. You can check out what's happening on amostbeautifulthing.com. The more Arshay Cooper will be coming at you, thanks to our friends at Amazon Studios.
That's pretty cool.
And the film just continues to We're just off, for example, a global presentation with and for every employee at Target, JP Morgan. We're seeing huge companies engage around the film in ways that we never could have anticipated. And to see especially white stakeholders that hold the levers of power in this country, many of whom, by the way, have held an or, right? Because maybe they prepped at Exeter or Andover, or went to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, HBS. For this community to embrace this story in our Shea, and the film is unlocking an empathy and an understanding that is, honestly, it's mind-blowing. I mean, I had a guy, Boston guy, went to St. Paul's, went to Harvard College, call me up and say, Mary, I knew I had privilege. I had no idea how unfair and how lucky I was to have that privilege. And boy, damn, I need to do more. Right? Okay, yeah, you need to do more. Like, make it painful, right? Write an extra zero on that check, or go into schools, or whatever it is, right? Like those of us that come from the world of privilege, I feel like, again, we have been the fortunate beneficiaries of something that is unfair and undemocratic, and to whom much, as Kennedy said, right? To whom much is given, much is expected, and much more has to be done, myself included.
I appreciate the time. This is fun. I had a ball.
All right, my friend. Well, listen, my new friend, I'm going to have to tell Ninth Wonder that he is up on your wall. And again, thank you. If there are other questions from, our friends that are tuning in.
Yeah.
Listen, we're at office at 50 eggs, mostbeautifulthing.com. Come at us, hit us up, tweet, #mostbeautifulthing. We'd love to hear from you. And again, as a lifelong Bostonian, I'm a masshole like, many others.
I would never call you that.
You're very kind. Yeah, I drive. As my kids say, I've really toned down my language when I drive. Complete Boston driver, but
Yeah, I stopped driving because you guys.
Trying to mellow out.
Completely stopped driving because of Massachusetts.
You did?
I'm out of here. I'm not doing it again. I'm done.
All right, my friend. Well, listen, thank you for having me. Thank you to the Boston Globe. Wonderful to see you, my friends.
Absolutely.
All right, talk to you soon.
And you guys too.